Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking something pretty wild. A document that claims to have calculated a precise timeline for, you guessed it, the end of the world. So, can you actually calculate the exact year of the apocalypse? Well, the source material we're digging into today argues absolutely. Its method is a really fascinating mix of scripture, history, and a whole lot of numerology. Okay, let's dive right in. To even begin to understand this timeline, we first need to get a handle on the two fundamental keys the author uses to unlock the whole thing. Think of them as the prophecy's building blocks. All right, first up is this idea of a generation. Now, you and I, we probably think of a generation as 20, maybe 30 years, but the author here says, nope, not even close. They argue it's actually way, way longer. And this verse right here is the reason why. It's the first crucial building block for their entire calculation. So the main takeaway is this: one generation equals 120 years. Remember that number because it's going to be really important. The second key is what they call a prophetic day. This comes from the biblical phrase time, times, and half a time, which in these circles is pretty commonly interpreted as a 3.5-year period. So there you have it, a 120-year generation and a 3.5-year prophetic day. With those two ideas, the author starts building. Okay, so let's see how they use that first key, that 120-year generation, to actually pinpoint a major event, the return of Christ. So according to the author, this final generation had to start somewhere, right? They say it began with the signs described in Matthew 24. Nation will rise against nation. For them, that points to one specific event, the outbreak of the First World War. So that's the starting block. The year 1914. This is the anchor for the entire timeline. And from this one single date, the author makes their first, and you could say biggest, prediction. And honestly, the math here is pretty straightforward. You just take step 1, 1914, the start of that final generation. Step 2, you add the length of one of these special generations, which is 120 years, and boom, the result, 2034. That's the year they claim Christ's return should occur. But hold on, 2034 is just one piece of this puzzle. To get to the next key date, the author shifts gears from simple addition to something way more symbolic, literally turning physical distance into a measure of time. So they point to this passage in the book of Joshua, where the Israelites were told to keep their distance from the Ark of the Covenant, about 2,000 cubits. Now what's so interesting here is that this is where the logic takes a pretty big leap. A cubit is a measure of length, right? Well, in this system, it gets reinterpreted as a measure of time. So those 2,000 cubits of distance become 2,000 years, a symbolic gap separating the death of Christ, who is seen as the symbolic ark here, and the final trials of his people. This 2,000-year bridge is absolutely central to the longer timeline. Right, so according to this theory, after the return in 2034, things don't just end. It's more like the beginning of the final chapter. A whole sequence of things has to happen. The Great Tribulation ends, a 13-year period of peace begins, and then a series of 7 trumpet judgments kicks off, with each one lasting for 3.5 years. And this table really lays out the final calculation perfectly. You start with the date of return, 2034, add that 13-year period of peace, which gets you to 2047, then add the 7 trumpets, that's another 24.5 years, and then there's this 1-year grace period they subtract. When you put it all together, you land right at the year 2070. But the timeline doesn't stop in 2070. Nope. The author maps out a further 1,000 years, and even beyond that, describing what happens after this long period of peace. So you have this 1,000-year reign of peace. Sounds pretty good, right? A kid who's 100 years old is basically considered an adult. But after that's all over, Satan is apparently released from his prison. And what happens next? A final rebellion is planned, one that's said to last for about 120 years. Okay, let's take a step back for a second. Let's zoom out and see how all of this fits into what the author presents as a complete 7,000-year master plan for all of humanity. And here it is, the whole thing laid out. This timeline really visualizes the entire prophetic history as they see it. You can see all the key dates we've talked about. Christ's death around 34 AD, then you jump forward to his return in 2034, the Millennium kicks off around 2070, and it just keeps going, all the way to the end of a final rebellion before this final jubilee and the proposed beginning of eternity. So, how do they tie this all together? Well, the author connects this whole 7,000-year plan back to the 7 days of creation. You know that line from the Psalms, "To God, 1,000 years are like a single day"? That's the idea here. All of human history is framed as a symbolic week of millennia. And just when you thought the numerology was over, there's more. Get this. According to the source, the year 2070 also lines up with the 119th Jubilee in ancient 50-year cycle. This means the millennium starts right before the symbolic 120th cycle, which echoes that 120-year generation we started with. It all comes full circle, you see. So the author wraps it all up with this final argument. They say, look, Jesus only forbid knowing the day and the hour of his return. But that restriction, they claim, doesn't extend to the year or the month. So the idea is that, yeah, the exact moment is a mystery, but the year itself, that's been revealed for those in the final generation to understand. So, what are we left with? An ancient blueprint for the future, or a modern puzzle of faith and numbers? What you should take away from this is an incredible look into a super intricate system of interpretation. It shows how scripture, dates, and symbols can be woven together to create this unbelievably detailed roadmap. And it kind of leaves us with a final thought. What happens when a sacred text is read not just as a story, but as a code that's just waiting to be cracked?